instead of trying to do a book by book review, which I have been previously for books 1 and 2, I'm going to combine books 3 and 4 and just give my final series thoughts and feelings on Book of the New Sun. So this is a combo review for Sword of the Lictor, Book 3, as well as Citadel of the Autarch, Book 4 of Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. So hello, my name is Zach. Thanks for checking out this video. This channel is mostly science fiction and fantasy reviews, but also delving into things like comics, manga, sometimes on movies and anime, but yeah, a little of everything. But yes, we're squarely in the sci-fi fantasy genre here, doing this throwback read that I saw recommended so many times on Reddit. It sounded right up my alley. And now, having finished the entire 4 book series of Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun, I do agree it was exactly what I was looking for. It was kind of a throwback. It's an older series written in the 80s. And yeah, it's just different from anything I've read before in a good way. Also, in just not in a bad way, but in a confusing way. It was, if you read about it, yes, it was a very confusing series overall. To give that final series, end of series wrap up, I felt my time was definitely worth it. It was definitely a fun, fun is the right word, but it's a challenging read for sure to just keep everything straight, sort of in the way that Malazan has you keeping a lot of things in your head and trying to figure out what was going on. So would almost call it a Malazan light, but not really at all. It's just the series that makes you think is the best way to describe it. And book 3 and 4, which is this review, but also just an entire series kind of recap is, yeah, that had me feeling that way. So to talk about the books individually, book 3, Sword of the Lictor, is continuing Severian's journey. And again, this review is just going to be in general spoiler light, but we are talking about books 3 and 4. So no, I'm just going to allude to a few things, but not spoil it for sure, because now that I finished book 4, it is, yeah, not really, there's stuff that happens, but it recontextualizes, but I'll get there. So book 3, Sword of the Lictor, is, I enjoyed it a lot actually, because it was more of a journey book. It was like a world building book with more on Severian's wild, weird journey that he's been on since book 1 and in book 2. Now in book 3, he's kind of established himself in his role and as the lictor of Thrax, and he's, yeah, he just meets a lot of really interesting scenes. So those parts in book 1 and 2 where you're following along and he's just going from like, yeah, event to event, and as you're reading, you're like, what is he even happening? Are these aliens? Are these monsters? It's that whole blend that we've seen in the series so far, where it is that future Earth, Earth with a U. This is Earth, but it's our Earth in the far distant future with a dying sun. So it's that dying Earth dystopian where technology is now fantasy. So it is that sci-fi fantasy blend in the sense that Severian, yeah, like as we saw in the first book, he lives in an old spaceship, but it it wasn't really apparent. Just you get kind of hints that the structure that they live in is this old reused spaceship. There's other things like that throughout the series where it seems magical and it seems almost, I guess, yeah, commonplace for Severian himself, because at that point in the far future, this is just their everyday life. Like Severian doesn't flinch when, yes, he starts talking to someone and they turn out to be a cyborg. He doesn't call them out for being a cyborg. That's just how they are, because that's commonplace in this current state of the world that Severian lives in and operates in. So it's that weird thing where Severian, yes, he's an unreliable narrator to us as the reader, but not so much that he's leaving things out. It's more that his worldview is different from our worldview, because the things that he's describing are his everyday life. So it's not, he doesn't have to point them out because that's his, yeah, that's his day to day. But for us as the reader, that yes, it's weird that he's in a spaceship, but the narrator slash the author, because it's Severian himself, doesn't point that out either, because he doesn't have the context that we're reading it in modern time, our modern times, not his modern time. So yeah, Gene Wolfe plays with that idea a lot, how he describes the events and things that happen. In book 3 was an example where Severian is going to a lot of these episodes, sort of, I guess. I was trying to understand myself and reading it, where he encounters different events on his journey, and it all sort of seems connected, but not really. It was hard to understand kind of what the point of book 3 was for me, as because there's not like this arc. And another point I read when I was trying to understand the series myself is that all 4 books were kind of written as one book, but I think Gene Wolfe was asked me by the publisher to split up into 4 books. And after reading book 4, yes, it makes sense, because now I'll jump into book 4, Citadel of the Autarch, which, yeah, it just brings the series to a satisfying conclusion for sure. It wraps up. It's hard to say wraps up. It definitely recontextualizes 100%. That is a good way to describe it. Recontextualizes what you read before. So the book itself, into book 4, Citadel of the Autarch, it was hard to understand what was happening, because a big aspect of this book is this country war that was happening. And again, this is the kind of leads into the reread ability of the series. I guess it was happening the whole time. I mean, from Severian's point of view, that the war of the Commonwealth versus Askia has been happening the entire series, but now Severian is on the front lines and he experiences a lot of the battle, which is presented in, again, a simple, or a common, I guess you say, fantasy framing. So it does read like a fantasy series, like an epic battle that's happening. Severian's on the front lines, experiencing the war, the fights. But it was, for me, and I think other readers as well, a little bit jarring, because Severian has been on this solo journey where he's meeting all these different people. He's traveling to different lands in a very fantasy kind of structured manner. And then we finally get to, he's gone to these locations. He's gone to the Citadel of the Autarch. He's gone to other places. And now he's on the front lines of this battle. And the people in the battle are very weird. They talk in like this code. And yeah, it's very interesting to read about the combatants and the people that Severian meets, again, which is a hallmark of the series, that the things that Severian experiences are very unique and very out there for us as readers. And this, once he's done with kind of the war arc, I guess you could say, on this, they're all rather short books. We get to the ending, and yeah, it's, again, it recontextualizes what we learn at the end of book 4. Not that, so the earlier books had a lot of, I guess, foreshadowing, or things that, once you know kind of what is happening in the series and kind of where Wolfe as the author is going, once you read the ending, doesn't necessarily say it makes sense, not in the way that like a Sanderson book has all the plot lines coming together and you're like, that aha moment, that Sanderlanche, where an earlier thread catches up to another thread and they all come to a climax. This is more of an exposition where we understand as readers a little bit more of what Severian was going through and why he was going through it, I guess you could say. And by doing that, it does definitely make me want to reread the earlier books, because I think those, like hints and things that we sort of understood what was happening now are going to make a lot more sense, especially because the whole novel itself was written as this is Severian telling his story, and how he frames his own story, if that makes sense, is he does this in a semi-chronological order, but because we get to the end, it's maybe, yeah, like a little bit out of order, that some things maybe happened earlier that make more sense, that were like framed in a different light. Yeah, it just, even talking about it, when I was trying to, like, go through my thoughts of what is happening, it was hard to piece together a good way to say this without too much spoilers, but with also, and show my enthusiasm, because it was still a good read. And it does read, once you finish at book 4, like it was just one book, that is not very episodic. That I know, like at the end of that book 1, Severian talks to the reader and says, if you really want to continue on this journey, then, I don't blame you for not wanting to continue reading. And he has these little pieces where Wolfe, I guess, went in and edited and had Severian, break up the books, break up his story into 4 parts. But it does read as one long story, where it does make sense to just kind of go along in one long book, which maybe was not a common thing at the time when it was written in the 80s, because each book is only, from an audiobook length, was about like 8 to 10 hours. So in total, like a 40-hour book, which is like a normal epic fantasy book in total, which at the time was maybe not as common to write a huge 40, 50 hour fantasy epic. So it does maybe make sense from a publishing standpoint and reader standpoint at the time to break this into 4 smaller episodes, but it is definitely one long cohesive story that was obviously planned out from the beginning, because each chapter just flows together and it tells one whole arc of Severian's life in this first quadrilogy, tetralogy of Book of the New Sun, because I know there's other ones. There's Book of the Long Sun or Short Sun. I think there's 2 more follow-up series, but this tells Severian's arc, very well. So my general kind of overall wrap up, like thoughts and feelings as a whole, is it was challenging to read for sure, because there were so many times throughout the series where I'm reading and not really understanding what was happening. It was definitely kind of a go with the flow. You're not, I guess, meant to understand, that maybe is designed to be reread and re-experienced, because so many things that Severian talks about, I guess, because again, he's the one writing it, he talks about it with someone who's at the end of the journey, who knows the earlier stuff, so he contextualizes it a little bit. And that's why I say the ending makes more sense and makes you want to go back to the beginning, because once you know kind of more context around the events at the end, that recontextualizes some of the beginning events. And just as you go in the story, you kind of, you pick up on these things, these cues, like, yes, it's a future Earth. Yes, they live in a spaceship. Some of these people are aliens. Some of these people are cyborgs. Some of these people, it's not really monsters, but they're monsters in the current world, where it's a monster, but it's like with a technology, like a future, again, thousands of years, I think millions of years in the future of our future. So it's not necessarily monster like Frankenstein's monster sort of thing. It's just someone who's like augmented themselves, and they're a monster to the current people in the world. So it's very interesting, very disorienting. It was, I felt like a fever dream. It felt very, you want to kind of piece together what's happening and understand Severian's journey. But I did enjoy my time with Book of the New Sun. I thought it was a very interesting read, a very dense read, because there's just so much references and alliteration in the work itself, that even without a reread, it was a good story. But it definitely has a payoff at the ending, and I think it has value to push through. And if you're watching this, you probably at least are interested in the series, or if you've made to book 2, there's no way you're going to stop at book 2, because you really need to finish book 3 and 4. 3 and 4 as a whole were not really like as if they're related, but book 4 is definitely worth pushing through to understand all the prior events. So even if you just started book 1, get through the next 2 books, get to book 4, finish the series. It's not that long as a whole compared to modern series, and it was really worth my time. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was confusing, so like on a like satisfaction, it was maybe like a 4 out of 5, but as a yes, it's doing a lot of things, and it's kind of pushing the genre forward. It's making me think a lot. It's really stretching my my ChatGPT abilities, where I'm asking ChatGPT like, what is going on? I use ChatGPT as a read along buddy, where I would prompt it to say, okay, can you help me piece together where Severian is right now? Who are these people? Can you remind me what Baldanders and Dr. Talos are doing in the play within a play, and these literary devices that Gene Wolfe is using, without being spoilers. So yes, definitely prompt your LLM you're using to not spoil you, but just to help you understand and frame where you currently are in the story. And that helped me understand and keep track of a lot of things that had happened and were happening as I was reading book 3 and 4, and of course 1 and 2. It's a lot to keep track of, and I do recommend pushing through and doing this in a rather short time period, because it is one cohesive story. It does reward you to kind of just keep pushing through book to book to keep everything fresh in your mind, because a lot of things are relevant that were earlier, they are relevant later, and are important in all the books. So that was, I guess, a general overall series review. So if you've watched this so far, hopefully you have read book 3 and curious about 4, you read book 4. And if you've read all the series like I have now, I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave me anything that I missed. Is it worth it to start a reread this quick? Should I let it simmer some more? Should I check out any other analysis videos? I'm sure there are. I've read that there's tons of analysis. There's PhD level analysis of the story. It's been around for a long time, since the 80s. So people have done like dissertations on Gene Wolfe's work, and I see why. It is, yeah, it's one of those books that rewards, I think, dissection, understanding, and rereading. So it's definitely on my list of things to do, even though there are a million books to read and never ending TBR list. But eventually I do want to get back to rereading Book of the New Sun, and I guess maybe continuing on to the Long Sun and Short Sun. Is that worth reading? Should I continue on to the next follow-up series? So let me know, and thanks for watching this video, my review of book 3 and 4 of the New Sun and the entire series. So my name is Zach. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.